Bruchim Aboyim to the 10th in the continuing series of shiurim on hashkafacircle.com, which is entitled The Oral Tradition of the Written Law. And last time, as we began discussing the oral tradition of the written law, namely the avodah, the service of the Cohen Gadol on Yom Kippur. Actually, the last two times, I should say. Actually, lectures 8 and 9 were devoted to that. And we spoke about the fact that the avodah, the service of the Cohen Gadol, which was in fact, as we defined it, a type of I would say a duplicate of the historical event of Har Sinai, where the Cohen Gadol, just in a certain sense like Moshe Rabbeinu, comes and enters into the Anon, in which there's a connection, a spiritual connection, a physical spiritual connection with the HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that in fact this avodah later becomes a public event, right? Which is in fact actually the Yom Tov of Yom Kippur, in which the entire nation is called upon to fast and to atone for their sins. Now, I want to speak a little bit about this emergence, say the emergence, but in fact actually the continuum, the scriptural continuum, from the avodah of the Cohen Gadol to the public fast, which the Torah commands us on the 10th day of the 10th day of Tishrei. A very central pasuk, which actually we've spoken about, is in Vayikra, Perek Tezayin, and pasuk Chav Gimel. And until then, the Torah, actually all the pasukim, until pasuk Chav Beis and Perek Tezayin, the Torah details the avodah of the Kohen Gadol, lifnai v'lifnim, as he comes into the Kodesh HaGadoshim. The Torah speaks about the Zrikas Hadam, the Azaz Hadam, the Zrikas Hadam. The Torah details the two shiurim, the Sil Azazel, and the different korbanos would constitute the core and the essence of the avodah of the Kohen Gadol, which is coming for Kapar and Tahira of Klal Yisrael on Yom Kippur. Pasuk Chav Beis, in a certain sense, brings to a close the avodah of Kapara and Tahara, the avodah of Kapara mainly, when it says V'nosa asir alav es kol avodosim le'os gezerah v'shilach es tzorah Bamidbar, that the Cohen Gadol sends away the scapegoat. And in a certain sense, the avodah, whose purpose is the atonement of Klal Yisrael, comes to a conclusion here. After that, the Torah tells us in Pasuk Chav Gimel, it says, Va Aaron el Moyed, Aaron will come to El Moyed, Ufashel is big day abala shalovash b'voy al HaKodesh v'nichem sham. It speaks about Aaron coming to El Moyed and taking off the big day habat, which are the white garments, which are the garments that were especially worn for the avodah, for the service of fly lifnim, within the Kodesh and the Kodesh HaKadoshim, within Oil Moyed. And then it says, V'rochatz es b'sor b'mayim b'mokim kadosh, and then the Kohen Gadol has to immerse himself. Actually, there's rechitza and tevila, as Chazal learned. And then it says, V'lovash es begodov. And this indicates not Big Day Haba, which actually Chazal learned, which is clear from the Psukim, is speaking about the Big Day Hazav the Kohen Gadol normally wears. And it says V'yatza. V'yatza means he leaves Oil Moyed, leaves Mokum Kadosh, V'asas Oilosov es Oilas Ha'am. And then he brings the Oilos, his Oilosai, and the offering of the Am. And it's clear that the Pasuk Chav Daled details an avodah service, which is not the avodah l'fnai v'lifnim. This is not the avodah that the kohen is required to do within Oil Moyed. So we have a certain sense a shift, that there's avodah in the Kodesh HaKadoshim and in the Kodesh of the Oil Moyed. Then of course we have an avodah which is in the Chatzah, which is in the courtyard, which is similar to all other avodas which are performed during the year. However, the pasuk itself, Pasuk of Gimel, which we'll see, and we've already spoken about that Chazal have told us that this pasuk is actually, in fact, out of order. But the pasuk itself requires explanation. It says, "Uva Aaron el Oyel Moyed." Aaron will come to Oyel Moyed. Ufoshat es bigdei habad asher lovash b'voyel hakodesh, and he should take off the bigdei havad, the white garments, which he wore as he came voyel hakodesh, when he came to the kodesh. And kodesh here probably also means kodesh, kodesh kadoshim. V'ni chamsha. What's the Cohen Gadol doing? He's coming into Oyel Moed and taking off his clothes? That appears to be certainly that's not what the Cohen Gadol is doing. But the pasuk itself, right, requires an explanation. And then after that, he takes off his clothes and then he washes himself. And chas v'shalom, to think that Oyel Moed was a place where the Torah said a person should take off his clothes and immerse and bathe himself. So the pasuk itself, right, calls out Dav Sheni. The pasuk itself is not to be understood. We've seen, of course, and in fact, actually, that's point number one. So point number one is, so it's clear that the purpose of the Cohen Gadol is not to go into Oyel Moed and take off his clothes. That's clear. So Chazal, of course, were very much aware of this. And Chazal noticed, like in the Gemara in Yoma, and Daf Ayin Sefer Mud Beis, Tana Rabbanan, Uva Aaron el Oyel Moed. Lama Huba. In other words, Uva Aaron el Oyel Moed, for what? It can't be Ufoshet is Big Day Habad. In other words, Aaron is coming to an Oyel Moed for some reason, which the Torah at least does not reveal to us explicitly. Uva Aaron el Oyel Moed. And then after he does what he does, then it says Ufoshet is Big Day Habad. So it's the Hafshatas Habagodim, taking off the white garments, right, are not to be done in Oyel Moed, but rather Aaron comes to Oyel Moed, he does something which the Torah doesn't make explicit, and then after he does what he does, then Ufoshet is Big Day Habad. He takes off the Big Day Habad. So what is it that Aaron's doing? So Chazal learn, continue the Gemara, once again in Taf Ayin, Sofa Mud Beis in Yoma. Uva Aaron el Oyel Moed, Lama Huba. The question Lama Huba just means that there's obviously something that the Torah is alluding to, but certainly not telling us explicitly. Aaron is taking out of the Kodesh HaKadoshim the kaf and machta, which he left there when he was makta the keteras, when he burnt the incense. Shekol haparsha kula nem al asayda. And then Chazal go on to say that the entire parsha is said al asayda. Chutz bi pasuk zo. Now, in fact, actually, how did Chazal know that the parsha is not being said in order? Well, it's rather obvious, because the next pasuk, right? The next pasuk says, "V'rochas is b'soba mayim b'mokem kodesh v'lovish is begadav." Now, v'yotza v'osas elos elos ha'am. Now, we could say that Aaron HaKohen comes into Oyel Moed. He does whatever he does. Well, Chazal say to be made the kaf v'amachta, and then after that he's poshet the begadim, and then after that he goes out. He puts on v'lovish the begadim, means other begadim, which is the big diazav, the gold vestments, and then he does the oilais, which are in fact an avodah which is not lifnai v'lifnei, and therefore this avodah is like any avodah which is done in the chatzir. So in other words, there's a second chiddush here. Is that what you could have learned. He comes into Oyel Moed and does something, and after that, he goes on and does the rest of the avodah of the Yom, which is not, let's put it like, even though it might be unique to Yom Kippur, it's not necessarily an avodah that's centered in Oyel Moed. However, there's an interesting point which has to be brought out here, and the point I have to say appears in the Perish of Hagoyin Rab David Tzvi Hoffman and Vayikra. It's very, very interesting is that there's something unique in this pasuk about Aaron coming into the oil mayed. He doesn't come into oil mayed be'onon, with a cloud. In other words, Vayikra, in Achai, the Torah tells us, the Torah warns us, that in fact, Aaron should not come into oil mayed, and certainly the Kodesh HaKadoshim, right? Ki be'onon erel ha'kaporos. So therefore he has to come in and be marked at the Ketores. The HaKetores of Aaron is so he shouldn't just come in when ki be'onon erel ha'kaporos, but his connection with the Kodesh Baruch Hu has to be that he himself has to fill up through the Ketores, who burn the incense, has to fill up the Kodesh HaKadoshim with the Onon HaKetores. And that's the condition for connecting with the Kodesh Baruch Hu. Here, we see, interestingly enough, is that Aaron is allowed to come into oil mayed without an Onon, without a Ketores. What happened to the Ki Be'onon El HaKaporos? What happened? Now, one could say that perhaps, now it's clear that what Aaron is doing, the kaf amachta, it appears to be a certain sense, a type of a makabah, not a makabah patish. It's a final act. You know, it's a concluding act. In other words, the kaf hamachta seems to indicate that Aaron is entering in it, but he doesn't need the onan anymore. He's taking out the kaf and the machta. So David Tzvi Hoffman wants to say, repeat over what he has to say. It's not only B'Shem Oimroi, but the whole wants to say is, we see over here, is that after, it's clear that when can a person enter into oil mayed? After already a person has done the avodah that's required of him, and after perhaps he was makriv karbonos, then he can come into oil mayed anytime he wants. At least he can come in without an anakatonos. That's what David Tzvi Hoffman wants to say. So in other words, what is he coming to? What is he coming? I mean, what is he coming to answer? His kind of answer is, why would the psukim? In certain sense, he tries to answer why the psukim not in order. The answer is that after Aaron HaKohen has done the rest of the avodah, then already he can have a connection with the Kodesh Baruch Hu without the anakatonos. That's what David Tzvi Hoffman wants to say.
Does it say anywhere in Chumash that Aaron should leave the machta in there?
It's we learn from this, because he places them. Because he places it there, and the Ketores goes up.
He could have left with it in his hand.
That's true.
This pasuk is what's telling us.
They're telling right. The pasuk was telling us. Okay, that's what David Tzvi Hoffman is. Now I want to continue a little bit on this thing, because I think it's an important thing. It seems to me that it's rather clear in Chazal that based upon this idea that he's coming in without an anakatoros, without burning the incense, and he's taking out the kaf and machta, it seems to me that Chazal understood that that's a second stage. That's after another stage in the avodah. Meaning what? Meaning is that, in fact, and this is very, very similar in a structural way to the Korban Pesach. Just like in the Korban Pesach, we spoke about that there's Pesach Mitzrayim and there's Pesach Doros. And then how the Chumash gives us a spectrum of history from the Korban Pesach, which is eaten in Mitzrayim, to the Korban Pesach that's eaten with the Beis HaMikdash, when it's eaten ala Soiva, when they would bring the Shalmi Chagiga and the Chagiga Shudalet, and it was eaten ala Soiva, the Korban Pesach becomes incorporated into an avodah, which is the avodah of Simchas Yontiv and Chag HaPesach, and we spoke about that in detail. So too, it's clear here that the entering into the oil mayed is something which is incorporating the day of Yom Kippur from another aspect, not only the aspect of the avodah of the Cohen Gadol. In other words, when the Cohen Gadol enters without the anakatoros, so in a certain sense the Yontiv is not focused solely on the Cohen Gadol connecting with the Kodesh Baruch Hu, but rather it becomes much more of a public, I call it public celebration or a public fast, where in fact we don't expect everyone to go into the Kodesh HaKadoshim, but rather there's an entrance into oil mayed without the anakatoros. In other words, the entering is not a singular event involving the Cohen Gadol, but it's an entering which in fact becomes less, let's put it this way, less of a nullification of the physical, but more of an act which involves all of Klal Yisrael. Because not all of Klal Yisrael enters into none of Klal Yisrael does the avodah, enters in Yadon HaKatoros. In other words, let me make myself a little bit clearer. In other words, what happens is that the avodah of the Cohen Gadol at this stage is not something unique, that the Cohen Gadol confronts the presence, the Shechina, ki be'onen era ala kaporos, but rather this act of confronting the Shechina becomes now part and parcel of a public fast involving all of Klal Yisrael, and therefore there's no need for the Onen HaKatoros at this point. Meaning is that Chazal understood that after now we bring other kabbanis which are not focused on the avoid of kaparet oil moyed, and then after that the Cohen Gadol enters into the oil moyed and takes out the kaf and the machte. So in other words, what the Chumash is telling us is that this singular event, which focuses on the Cohen Gadol, now becomes incorporated within a more general public event. Just as, for example, the Korban Pesach, which is eaten at the very end of the Suda, incorporates the Korban Pesach within the celebration of the Yontif of Pesach, and not just the eating of the Tzli Eish, that was Pesach Mitzrayim, when it wasn't really a celebration, but was eaten, of course, with, in conditions in which they ate it. So, in other words, what are these other korbanos which had to be incorporated within the avodah? So, it turns out that in the Chumash, in Pashas Bamidbar, the Chumash, in Pashas Pinchas, right? Pashas Pinchas, in Perach Chav Ches, Perach Chav Tes, beginning Pasuk Zayin, the Chumash tells us, the Chumash is actually, the Torah is going through all the kabbalas of the different Yom Tovim, and the Chumash is relating it to us, the kabbalas of Yom Kippur. And it says, V'asol ha'chodesh ha'shvi hazeh mikra kodesh yelachem v'nisem es nafshay seichem. That means it's a public fast. V'kraftem oil Hashem reich nechoi. We have a par ben gebakar, a par. We have an ayil, and then we have shiva kavasim. And then we have a se'izim lachatas. It says, milvad chatas ha'kipurim. This is an addition to the avodah of the Cohen Gadol, the shnei shiurim the Cohen Gadol brought l'fnai v'lifnim. And in fact, Chazal focus on this in the sugya in Psachim, and beginning with the mission of Ayim and Aleph. And in fact, actually, there's a machlokes. The Gemara presents a machlokes Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Eliezer. How do we incorporate the kabbanis of Pashas Pinchas, Daf Ayim and Aleph? In Yoma, right. What did I say? Psachim, I'm sorry, Yoma, right? How do we incorporate the kabbanis of Pashas Pinchas, which are public kabbanis? It's a public atonement. There's no connect. It's not focused on the Cohen Gadol. How do we incorporate these kabbanis in Pashas Pinchas with the avodah of the Cohen Gadol on Yom Kippur? And then we have an interesting machlokes. I'm not going to go into it. That's only a shiur and Yoma. We have, for example, a machlokes of Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Eliezer. The Gemara answered, right? So according to Rabbi Eliezer, after the Cohen Gadol does the avodah of Yom Kippur, then after that, we do the kabbalah. We bring the kabbanos of Pashas Pinchas, and Rabbi Eliezer says, what's the reason? Because Teiras Kahanim comes before Chomish HaPakudim. In other words, just do it in order. First, you have the avodah of the Cohen Gadol, and then we have the public fast, the public kabbanos. So that's what Eliezer learns. You take the Chumash and you do it in order. A little bit, right? And comes Rabbi Akiva and says, no. Rabbi Akiva says, because in Chavtes Zayin, the Torah says, Milvad Chatas HaKippurim, and then the Torah also says, the lashon of the Chumash is milvad oilas habayker asher oilas hatamid. So Rabbi Akiva says no, you have to integrate the korbanos within the avodah of the Cohen Gadol Yom Kippur. Now it's very interesting. Rabbi Akiva is going l'shitasai. Remember we spoke about the machlokes and dispute Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yishmael, and Rabbi Akiva. We spoke about this when we spoke about the Chazon Ish in Simon Kuf Chafein Orachaim. We said it in Sis Parshas Torah. That was Rabbi Yishmael said that we have to look at the Chumash as it appears in order. And Rabbi Akiva says, no, that's not true. Right? Rabbi Akiva dashes from the Pasuk, Bahal Sinai. Then in fact, we can go back and learn the Chumash without order, that all the mitzvahs and the Prat were given Bahal Sinai too. It's very interesting that Rabbi Akiva here is taking the same shita that he takes there in the Yerushalmi Shkolim, or the Teras Kahanim, that the later parts of the Chumash, in fact, should not be understood to be in the order of the scripture, but rather one has to integrate the later parts of the Chumash into the early parts of the Chumash. And Rabbi Eliezer, this is not Rabbi Shmuel, it's Rabbi Eliezer, appears to be taking, what I would say maybe is the shita of Rabbi Yishmael, that one actually learns the Chumash in order. You with me? One learns the Chumash in order. Oh, so very, very good. So what does it mean? What it means is that, but however we understand it, now, in addition to that, when it says that the Cohen Gadol says, when it says here, he says, "V'oisa es oilasa ve'oilas ha'am," he brings two oilas. So there's a machlokes. The Gemara also brings a machlokes. Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Shimon, right? Whether one of these oilas, are these two oilas that are unique for Yom Kippur, or is one of these oilas, an ayil that's done here as an oila is the ayil that's mentioned in Bamidbar, Parshas Pinchas. So we see that what Chazal are doing is that they're integrating the later korbanos, which are part of a public fast, v'nisim nashvasechem, and are not focused on the unique entrance of the Cohen Gadol Fly Lifnim, and how much these are to be incorporated into the avodah of the Cohen Gadol, meaning that Chazal understood that in fact the avodah of the Cohen Gadol has to be incorporated into a public Day of Atonement, and in fact, on the basis of this, and the remez, the ha'ala that Chazal saw in the Chumash was the fact, I want to claim, using Hoffman's idea, that the Kohen Gadol is going into the Kodesh HaKadoshim, but without other nakatoras, which means the Kohen Gadol avodah becomes much more incorporated into the avodah of the Am. There's not a unique status, ontological, spiritual status of the Kohen Gadol, but rather it's an avodah like all other avodas. That's what I want to say. Now it's very interesting.
The whole thing, or just the second, just the last one, he goes back to get the machta.
Right, the last one. That's the last one. The other
one is
Avadi is going in beyond nakatoras. Right. Now, a little bit of an aside, as you all know, the Gemara in Daf Nun Gimel, I think it's Daf Nun Gimel in Yoma, speaks about a machlokes between Chazal and the Stukim. How does the Kohen Gadol, when does the Kohen Gadol burn the ketayos? So, B'zosh yavo aron ala kodesh, right? Kiben ala ketayos. Kibe onen era ala kapoiros. So the Stukim learned that Aaron HaKohen has to burn the incense, the ketayos, and then enter the Kodesh HaKadoshim. And Chazal very vehemently argued on this. The Gemara there brings the relevant psukim. What I want to focus on is that this machlokes was a fundamental machlokes. In fact, when the Kohen Gadol was quarantined 7 days, the last night they used to make the Kohen Gadol swear that he wasn't at Stuki, which means that Chazal understood that this machlokes was a fundamental machlokes. What could be so fundamental about this machlokes? I want to explain to you what's fundamental. The Stukim, as we know, didn't believe in Teresh B'Al Peh, which means they rejected man's ability to reason, to intellectualize. Everything is Teresh B'Chsav. There's no place for man's intellect. So for the Stukim to enter into the Kodesh Kodashim, you can only enter with Anan HaKteres. it's not shaykh to be in the Kodesh HaKadoshim if you haven't walked over the threshold in a cloud. I think it's called a fire cloud. For Chazal, that's not true. You could enter into the Kodesh HaKadoshim initially without burning the ketores, and then you burn the ketores. In other words, the act is a halachic act, which Chazal understood based upon the principles of the Torah Shebial Peh, which are only elucidated and fathomed through man's intellect. So I want to claim that this pasuk of Aaron entering without a ketores at all is a unique feature of the Torah Shebial Peh, and Chazal express it by fact that through the koyach hamasura lanu, the Torah Shebial Peh from Chazal, they in fact actually what? They in fact actually said the pasuk is not written in order, it's written in another place in the Chumash. In other words, the most quote-unquote daring drasha of Chazal, where they actually take the pasuk and say it's referring to a later part of the Avodah. Loibim koimei nechtab, say Chazal, is precisely a pasuk which describes the Cohen Gadol entering without a ketores whatsoever, which signals to us the importance of the human intellect. The man connects with HaKadosh Baruch Hu through his intellect, and not purely in some spiritual realm where he has to burn a ketores. You're not with me.
I don't get the case.
In other words, like this: for Chazal, entering into the Kodesh HaKadoshim without a ketores represents the supremacy of human intellect. For the tzdukim, a person cannot enter unless he's covered with an anon ketores. He has to be submerged in ruchnis and spirituality. Chazal understood that even though when a person connects with the Kodesh Baruch Hu, he has to be mispachet, he has to be stripped of his physicality, nonetheless, this is something which a person with his intellect decides to do through his understanding of the Torah. Therefore, he enters into the Kodesh HaKadoshim without the ketores. You're not with me.
I understand what Rabbi Triebitz is saying, but I could suggest the other way that
that's
true.
True.
Believe in Masorah, and they've got a Masorah Torah Shebial Peh. This is the way to do it. Nothing to do with intellect.
But what's the
so
what?
Do you accept the Masorah without?
If they weren't arguing with the Stukim or the Guru, but this would seem to be a fundamental argument with the Stukim.
About whether there's a Masorah or not.
No, I disagree with you. The Stukim only believe in Torah Shebial
because they hold it.
Torah Shebial Peh involves a human intellect. That's what I understand.
But over here in this particular loch, it's not. I mean, maybe.
I'm sorry. Maybe this was a drush of Chazal.
Maybe yes, maybe no. I'm saying Rabbi Triebitz is saying it means intellect. It could also, perhaps, it means a belief in the Masorah.
Okay,
which is nothing to do with
that's the way David said he's learning. I'm going to learn differently. I'm going to learn that according to Chazal, pure Torah Shebechsav, without the Torah Shebial Peh, as the Beis Halevi says in his drasha, in Chelik Beis the drasha, the Shut Beis Halevi, is that the purpose of Torah Shebial Peh is that man's intellect takes a role in what you're calling the Messiah.
No, there's a difference.
Let me continue. Oh, you want to? Okay, I'll give you the stage.
I think there's a difference between developing halachot, which is Torah Shebial Peh.
I don't want.
Over here in the Bamidbar, they did it this way. Aaron Cohen did it like this with the seder that's written. That the
Chazal saying in this that he brought. Wait a minute, one second. I think we're in two places, different places. We're speaking about the machlokes between Chacham and between Chacham and Stukim. Did Aaron HaKohen enter in with the ketores, or did he let the ketores when he was in the Kodesh HaKadoshim?
So the way Aaron did it, l'choreh, is what HaKadosh Baruch Hu told Moshe Rabbeinu is the way he should do it.
I understand.
It's not a major invention of Chazal or a drasha.
Chas v'shalom. But there's obviously a machlokes between Chacham and the Stukim, and actually, in fact, the Gemara presents us two ways the way they learned it. So I want to claim. The drasha of Chazal, which is the Torah Mesura B'Yadeinu. Chazal are telling you that this is what the Kodesh Baruch Hu told Aaron HaKohen. Yeah. It's saying is that the connection with the Kodesh Baruch Hu is not only purely through Anan HaKetores, but it has the human intellect. Anan HaKetores means like a Moshe Niklas B'Toich Ava Anan. It's the spashtus of the guf. It's a spiritual state. But I want to claim is that the fact that I can enter in the Kodesh HaKadoshim without Adon Ketores means that man also maintains his intellect independent of this complete spiritual state. That's what I want to say. You want to disagree, you can disagree. That's what I want to say. And therefore, and I want to claim that why was this a fundamental dispute with Chazal and the Stukim? Because the Stukim only believed in the Torah Shabbat. There's no Torah Shabbat. There's no rule for man's intellect. And because of that, I cannot even enter the Kodesh HaKadoshim without being encased in the Anon HaKatayras. Why She'enkin, Chazal understood that my connection with the Kodesh Baruch Hu does involve the independent uses of man's intellect, and therefore I could enter into the Kodesh HaKadoshim without the Anon HaKatayras, and then I'll be the drasha of Chazal, which is the Ratzon of a Kodesh Baruch Hu, which I've discovered using my intellect, and this was told Aaron. Then, in fact, actually, I can be marked to the Ketores with the Kodesh HaKadoshim. That's what I'm saying.
Do we find that, almost as a Kal V'chomer, that Saducees disagreed with the second entry of the Cohen Gadol without any cloud at all? So,
it's very, very interesting, is that, I don't know if they disagree, but one thing is for sure. The fact that the Pasha, the Chazal say, that the pasuk is written Shalai Kesidron, certainly would have ironed the opposition, ironed the Stukim. The Stukim understand you read the Chumash like you read a story, a newspaper. You don't read it Shalai Kesidron. Shalai Kesidron is Spitz Teira Shebial Peh. And I want to claim, why is this Spitz Teira Shebial Peh? Because Chazal understood the intellect of Moshe Rabbeinu, Hamasura b'yadeinu, the drushes of Chazal, as we explained about the Torah's coming to Marabbis us to that fact. And this is understood in the Chumash, using Abdov Tzfafman's idea, that the Cohen Gadol can enter into the Kodesh HaKadoshim without an Anon HaKatayros. Because the incorporation of the other Karbanos within the Avodah of the Cohen Gadol, of which this pasuk is so essential and so central, this is the drushes of Rabbi Akiva, of Rabbi Eliezer, of all the Tanaim. There are 3 shitas in Chazal on this. That's what I want to say. Okay. Now, I want to just mention one more thing too. It's interesting that the Gemara says, of course, why is the pasuk written out of order? My timer. I'm on Ayin Aleph and Aleph in Yoma. So the Gemara says, Amar Rav Chisda Gemiri. This halacha l'Moshe Sinai, Chamesh Tevilos v'Asar Kiddushin Tevel Kohen Gadol u'Mekadosh Bo B'Yom. This halacha l'Moshe Sinai. Now, the way we explained the psukim now, while it is halacha l'Moshe Sinai, but it seems this is what Rabbi Sedley is saying. There's no logic. There's no ideas in this. Halacha l'Moshe Sinai. Chamesh Tevilos, that's it. I want to claim not necessarily so. Why? Because we see in the Rosh, in Hilchas Mikvos, and the Rosh brings from a Rash, I believe in Yadayim, that sometimes when the Gemara is nokat halacha...
Which page?
Well, actually, I know, let's see, it's in the Rosh, it's Pei Tes, I guess you'd say Amud Beis, begins Hilchas Mikvos. I have it in front of me over here. I'm not going to read from it, but I have it in front of me for the picture.
They can't actually see it in the video.
In the Chamesh, the Rosh says that even though the Gemara many times he brings a right from She'uvim, that Pasal HaMikvah, even though the Gemara says Halacha l'Mishmi Sinai, says the Rosh, something means Kloima, Dova Bora Halacha l'Mishmi Sinai, something which is clear, like Halacha l'Mishmi Sinai. Now, of course, the Rosh there is making a distinction between the Rabbanan and the Eraisa. This is obviously Eraisa. But what I want to claim is we see that the notion of Halacha l'Moshe Sinai also can have a logic to it. Dova Bora can have a logic to it too. In fact, I always use that to explain. I don't know if I explained it here. I explained it here in the
Rambam show.
Okay, anyway, Chavtes Amud Beis, when Rabbi Akiva says Halacha l'Moshe Sinai in the Shashav Daita Moshe Rabbeinu, the Moshe Rabbeinu was happy that Rabbi Akiva is using his intellect, his Devarim Borim. That's what's in the Shashav Daita Shel Moshe Rabbeinu. So, what I want to claim is that there is a logic to Halacha l'Moshe Sinai. We're not obviating the fact that it doesn't come Sinai, but here it has to be a double bora. It's clear. The Halacha l'Moshe Sinai is the pasuk was written out of order, because the writing of the pasuk out of order is that what Moshe Rabbeinu was telling us, that the the connection between a Kodesh Baruch Hu and Klal Yisrael is not only the singular connection of the Cohen Gadol and the Kodesh Gadoshin, Ba'anak HaTeiras, but in fact everybody has this connection, right? Through his intellect we learn the Torah. And I want to claim, Vaharaya, that the day that was Nikba for Yom Kippur is this 10th day of Tishrei, which is Lucha Shniyos. And Lucha Shniyos, as the Beis Halevi says in the famous Drasha, is in fact Torah Shebi'al Peh. So the Torah was Nikba on the day, Yom Kippur was Nikba, was set on the day that the Torah Shebi'al Peh was given to Klal Yisrael, that man's intellect would also be a participant in the Torah HaMasura from a Kadosh Baruch Hu through Moshe Rabbeinu to Klal Yisrael throughout all the Doros. And in fact, the incorporation of the Kabbanis in Bamidbar are part and parcel of this very, very process. That's what I want to say. I think there's much more to say. I'm sure Beis Lo says much more to say. But in any case, I think here we have an understanding how Chazal saw in the Psukim, which really is an oral tradition, how the Torah, the Avodah became part of an oral tradition, which means Torah Shebi'al Peh. The Torah Shebi'al is transmitted on top of Torah Shebi'al Peh, that could be interpreted and could be fathomed to its depth, right? In a way in which the Torah's Emes, right, and the Or HaTorah shines through the verses and through Chazal and through Klal Yisrael. Okay, I think this will probably be the last lecture in this series. There's much more to speak about that, but of course if we go on through other parts of the Chumash, we might as well be giving a Chumash here, which is going to be a lot more than 10 shiurim. So I think at this point maybe we have an idea of what...
If anyone wants to fund a Chumash here,
okay, in any
the hotlines are open now.
Okay, fine, very good. Anyway, so until the next series of shiurim from an undisclosed place in Yerushalayim, Ira Kodesh, Kol Tuv.